From Social Prosperity Partners, this is Community Catalysts.
The first few days after a bad audit gets posted online, it's a nightmare for local officials. I mean, there's death threats. The language that is, conveyed to these individuals is disgusting. I mean, it really is.
Welcome to Community Catalysts. I'm your host, Matt Lehrman, and this is the podcast where we explore what local leadership really looks like in communities across the country, not in theory, but in the real everyday work of building trust, solving problems, and shaping a future that people from all walks of life can believe in and want to build together. Whether you're an elected official, a city or school district staff leader, or a community advocate stepping up in your own way, this podcast brings you insight, encouragement, and practical ideas from people who speak from their own firsthand experience and hard-earned expertise about what it really takes to lead in local government. My guest today is Wade Beltramo, General Counsel at the New York State Conference of Mayors, or NYCOM. I had the opportunity to meet Wade this past May when I was invited to deliver the opening keynote for NYCOM's annual conference in beautiful upstate New York, and I made it a point to attend his eye-opening session titled Surviving Interesting Times, Preparing for Protests and First Amendment Audits. And what struck me most from his presentation, frankly, was the sheer audacity of what's called a First Amendment audit. And that's exactly what we're going to dive into today. Wade Beltramo, thanks for joining me and welcome to Community Catalysts.
Good afternoon, or I guess good morning for you. Thanks for having me.
We're 3 hours apart in our time zones. So yes, it just turned afternoon for you. Hey, Wade, before we dive into this, let me just read the full text of the First Amendment so everyone just has it fresh in their brain. I'm sure you could do it from memory, but I wrote it down. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. And so the key part here is Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech or of the press. That's the whole sentence that we're going to be talking about today. And look, everyone understands the First Amendment is the absolute bedrock of what is, I think most people would say, the single most important guarantee of the U.S. Constitution, the right to free speech. But Wade, in your presentation, I heard you say that the First Amendment is a minefield for government officials. Let's start there. Why is it a minefield?
Oh, because it's so complicated. I mean, they're not very many words, right, in the First Amendment. It's a few words there that guarantee protections, but human interactions are complex, right? And I think that's one of the challenges. What does free speech mean? What does freedom of the press mean? It is all very complex. And I say this time and again, most lawyers don't have a firm understanding of the First Amendment. Just because you're a lawyer doesn't mean you're versed in every area of law. And First Amendment jurisprudence itself is extremely complicated. I mean, we just had another First Amendment case today handed down from the Supreme Court a couple hours ago. And it's difficult. It is difficult to navigate. So I always advise local officials and the attorneys who represent municipalities to keep things simple because it is a complicated issue. Keeping things simple is frequently a better tack to take than trying to make things more complicated. And then the question of what alternatives are there to regulation, which is kind of a knee-jerk reaction to every time it's the proverbial for local government officials, every problem when you have a hammer looks like a nail.
Yeah. For
local officials, every problem, let's regulate, adopt a regulation, and that's our solution. And that's a problem. That therein lies ruin.
Wade, give me an example. If I'm a newly elected mayor and I come to you for an orientation session, what is the essential thing that you're going to tell me is what the First Amendment does and does not require?
Oh boy, that's a complicated issue. One of the things we tell our members, first of all, is like, is regulation necessary, right? Because anytime a local government acts, it runs the risk of infringing upon the First Amendment. So that in of itself is part of the challenge.
Wait, let me make sure I understand. You're saying just the very act of writing a regulation to implement that simple sentence from the Constitution, even that is fraught?
Well, yeah, because if you look at it, both the First Amendment and the First Amendment as it applies to local governments via the 14th Amendment, right? Because the First Amendment talks about the Congress shall make no law respecting the rights of individuals to petition their governments, to exercise First Amendment for freedom of the press. That was actually applied to local governments and state government via the 14th Amendment. But it talks about shall make no law. And at the local level, it's the adoption of a local law. It's the enforcement of laws. It's that action, the affirmative action, that is problematic. In that respect, if you're not regulating, then you're not running the risk of infringing upon somebody's First Amendment rights. The next thing I'll do is sometimes, and I get it, you get residents who come to you and they have a complaint. And one of the other areas that I give as an example is, like, for example, door-to-door solicitation. Many people find that annoying. They don't like people coming to their homes at all, but particularly like late at night, they're having dinner and they don't like being interrupted. Elderly individuals, they can feel threatened. And so, you have many communities like, oh, we want to adopt regulations prohibiting door-to-door solicitation outright, which you cannot do, but also, or regulate and say, hey, you can't go door-to-door after 5 p.m. Also, you can't do, that's not a reasonable regulation. And one of the things I pointed out is, why not, in those instances, instead of adopting a regulation, adopt a program to educate your constituents? Like, what are their rights? What should elderly individuals be aware of as far as the potential for scams from people going door to door? What are their rights with respect to refusing, telling people to leave their property? Or when should they call 911 and ask for the police? Like, educating your constituents is likely to have a better outcome than adopting a regulation that A, may be unconstitutional on its face, B, may never be enforced or difficult to enforce, or unconstitutional in its enforcement. And so from an effective standpoint, think about what you're doing. And then again, finally, keep it simple, and consult with your attorneys. I can't stress that enough. It's so complicated. There's certain principles I also try to, when I educate local officials, and I do quite a bit of training on this, I try to distill First Amendment principles into plain language. And one of the things that I talk about is like, okay, normally you have broad discretion when enacting local regulations, right? So long as you follow the proper procedure that's outlined or authorized under state law, your laws are going to be presumed to be constitutional, right? If they were challenged in a court. However, anytime there's an implication of a protected First Amendment right, the courts are going to sit up and they're not going to grant you the deference that they otherwise would. So you need to understand, well, how do we craft a regulation that's going to withstand a legal challenge? Is it overly broad? Is it under-inclusive? Does it give too much discretion to the enforcement officials? So I'll focus on those terms, but it's a challenge. It's a huge learning curve for local government officials. They never thought that they would be having to deal with this when they got elected, right?
Let me make sure I understand this. What I think I'm hearing you say is, we use the metaphor of touching the third rail, right? That the First Amendment is such a powerful third rail that anything that looks like it might touch it, right? That it might infringe upon it. You're saying the courts are going to interpret it with the greatest amount of deference. It's going to protect that at all costs.
Correct. I liken, discussions or debate over either local laws or regulations that might impact the First Amendment, or enforcement activities that might impact the First Amendment, as kind of a tennis match, right? And that the local officials, they enact the local law and they hit the ball over the net. And when the person returns the ball, they're like, hey, wait a second, this impacts my protected First Amendment rights. And as soon as that happens, the court sits up and looks at it. And the local officials can hit it back, but there are certain things that can be very problematic. And again, to the extent that, again, keeping it simple, if you would enact content neutral regulations that impact kind of First Amendment, protected First Amendment rights, so long as they don't allow for kind of like reasonable alternatives for expression, you can impose reasonable time, place, and manner restrictions. Again, so long as the regulation itself is content neutral. But even that can be complicated. To the extent that your regulation is not content neutral, like that you're regulating content, the courts are going to apply what is referred to as the strict scrutiny standard. And it is practically impossible for any government entity to craft a regulation that will withstand the strict scrutiny analysis.
Which means, well,
strict scrutiny. The strict scrutiny is the courts are going to require the government to demonstrate that it has a compelling government interest in this regulation, and also that the regulation is narrowly tailored. Now, one of the things that you might have missed there, and that I tried to emphasize, is that the onus or burden or obligation is on the government officials. And I have the saying, it's not original to me. It's a professor that conveyed it to me when I was in law school, that the law is 90% procedure and 10% substance. And at the time, I didn't understand what they were referred to, but now I totally understand. And I mean, even again, the decisions coming down from the Supreme Court today are focused substantially on procedure in so many respects. Who has what burden, right, is a big issue as to whether anybody's even going to bring litigation. Like if you go to an attorney and you say, well, I have this First Amendment case, and the attorney looks in and says, well, it's not really, their regulation's content neutral. This is a reasonable time, place, and manner regulation. The courts are going to be deferential to that regulation. And so is it worth the time and effort to actually, and the money to challenge that regulation? Because the onus or burden is going to be on us to demonstrate X, Y, and Z. Conversely, I go to an attorney and I complain, hey, this government entity has adopted this regulation that is content-based. It is regulating the content of my speech. And if an attorney looks at that and they say, oh, yeah, that definitely does. That is a content-based regulation. As soon as we get into court and we make that assertion and the court finds that, yes, that this is a content-based regulation, the onus or burden obligation shifts to the municipality. And that's a huge issue. The law is so procedural. And I think most people kind of don't process, lay people, many attorneys don't process that. It's all dependent upon who has what burden as to whether or not they're going to challenge a regulation or defend it, as the case may be.
So I'm not an attorney, and a good chance that a lot of our listeners are not attorneys. So I'm just going to see if I can't bottom line this, because I want to move into the meat of these so-called First Amendment audits. But here's what I think, what I understand what you're saying is the First Amendment is such an important thing that the court looks at it as we have this sense of free speech, and we're going to do everything we can to protect it. And if you, local government, take any steps to do that, just know that you're going to come under, you called it strict scrutiny, that you're going to have a pretty high bar that you're going to have to pass to be able to say that you can get in the way of that or put a fence around it. And Wade, let me just ask you, I'm not an attorney, but I was a government major in college, right? And there was a lesson that my favorite government professor did in class where he brought in the assignment was that everyone had to write the instructions for making a peanut butter and jelly sandwich on an index card. And he brought in a loaf of bread in the packet, and he brought in a jar of peanut butter and a jar of jelly. And then he proceeded to follow the instructions that his class wrote. And of course, it was a resounding mess, right? Because people wrote, and there was no way to actually write the instructions to make something as simple as a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. I'm kind of getting the sense that doing any kind of legislation or regulation around the First Amendment is going to create a similar kind of mess. Do I have the big picture of this?
Absolutely, absolutely, and even more so. Again, I talked about rules being again, if you adopt a regulation and like, oh, you try to put in some definitions, you try to put in a process and procedure. But again, if your regulations are overly broad, right? Meaning that, oh, you have a goal and objective, you have a government interest you're trying to address, but how you've crafted it infringes upon other people's rights that really isn't the intent or objective of your regulation. The courts are not going to like that. And conversely, like if you're under inclusive, if you regulate some activity but not others that's similarly implicated, the courts don't like that either. It's almost like it's a discrimination issue as well. And so 1,000%. I mean, again, normally, let's say you just have like we're adopting land use regulations or zoning or something. If you follow the proper procedure, the terms you use may not be the great. It may not be the best crafted or drafted local zoning ordinance. But if you follow the procedure, as a general rule, the courts are going to grant you deference. They don't want to be in the business. I mean, there's so many local governments. If they impose an exacting standard for local government action, they would be flooded. They'd never hear the end. They just have constant one case after another challenging local regulations. If it touches upon the First Amendment, though, they're going to sit up and take notice.
The deference goes the other way. So
Yep.
let's move forward. As I understand it, there's no official definition of a thing called a First Amendment audit. It's just a phrase that's been adopted, but it describes a real experience that people in cities and towns are having. And I wonder if you could first just walk us through what the experience might look like from a municipality's point of view. What are they experiencing that we're calling a First Amendment audit?
Generally, this activity, and one of the things to note here is at the outset, many of these individuals are claiming that there's protections for freedom of the press, and they don't necessarily work for a newspaper or a television station or radio station. But I think in this day and age, obviously, of the internet, and you can have your own media presence online.
Yeah, anyone can have a podcast.
Correct, and I would say that you technically have. You're the press in that instance. The questions of what extra protections the press has under the First Amendment, it's specifically enumerated. There's not a lot of jurisprudence with respect to the press. So what we fall back on is the right to record, and that's one of the major issues, which I'll get to. And one would think, well,
but Wade, walk me through it. If I'm at the front desk of the city, what's the experience that I'm having from that perspective?
So the experience is you're a clerk, you're at the oil desk or the water and sewer desk, and somebody comes in and they might just have their phone. They might have a more professional camera, but it's definitely not the normal interaction that you're dealing with on a day-to-day basis. I mean, they're dealing with residents who come in all the time to pay bills and what have you. This individual is coming in and not necessarily asking for anything at the outset, but just recording and panning around and on all of the interior of the municipal facilities. And we're talking about the interior of office buildings as a general rule. The village hall, town hall, city hall, they're going into the clerk's office, the assessor's office. They'll start walking around. They will definitely come up to the desks of the individual officials. They'll ask them their name and titles. They might submit FOIL requests. They might ask in particular about the municipality's compliance with ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act requirements. Do they have a coordinator or something along those lines? And then they'll just walk around, and they will walk through the entire municipal facility. They will go into any office that's open. Even if
Wow.
I think the average person would think, well, that's somebody's private office. I mean, it's a public officials, but it's their office where they do work. They'll try to open every door. Like, it doesn't matter. They will go through doors that are closed, and they'll open them up even if the light's off. They'll just walk around. But they will ask a bunch of questions from individuals, and it can be off-putting. Sometimes they wear masks. Not all of them do, I think, going back to COVID, but that was definitely a common occurrence. Some of them continue to wear masks. Simply, it's their their
Wait,
technique
let
or
me
what
let me
have
make
you.
sure I understand. So this is just an individual with an iPhone is
Anybody.
coming in. This is not like back in the day of 60 Minutes with Mike Wallace and someone carrying a camera and someone else carrying a boom mic and a whole team descending. This is one person walking in.
Generally it's one person. It can be a couple. It varies. One of the things to know too, I mean, they can have more professional equipment, which is, in this day and age, it's all pretty small and compact. It can be kind of a more of an SLR. It can be a more video camera, but it's definitely compact in a way that it's not like it's a team. It's not like it's announced either. They're coming in unannounced, out of nowhere, and they're just recording.
And literally just walking in, walking behind the desk, walking through the hallways, and they're not announcing themselves in some way. They're just kind of assuming that they belong.
Yeah, I mean, you could go on. There's no shortage of videos, and this is a nationwide phenomenon. Obviously, it's not just an issue here in New York. And I think to a certain degree, I would agree, they're citizen journalists in that respect. I don't know how effective, their stated purpose is to hold government officials accountable. And they're like, hey, we are living in a democratic society and we just want to observe what government officials are doing. And so that's kind of their goal and objective, to record the interior of municipal office buildings, and the officials.
Is the goal, Wade, just to film, or is the goal to actually strike a confrontation somehow?
You look at it, they definitely get more clicks when there's, a confrontation results, and you can have a great interaction for the first 30 minutes of their visit in a municipal facility. Whether or not that gets posted online or not, they'll definitely have like the intro. They walk into the municipal facility. If there is a confrontation, that's going to get special attention, and it will then be escalated. I mean, they will focus on that and kind of try to needle the official who doesn't respond the best, I would say. I mean, and that's to put it nicely.
Are you saying the person who resists saying their
correct.
name,
or title,
or who blocks entry to an office or to a conference room or something?
Correct. If there is a confrontation, then they'll push it so that confrontation is escalated. Absolutely. That is, I don't, far be it from me to assign it, that's just what we see in the videos. It definitely, I think, gets more clicks and views. I mean, some of these videos we're talking rack up, 70, 80,000 views online. It is very engaging for a certain population. And so, but we hear from some communities where, oh, it went great, there was no confrontation. Well, that video never gets posted. So
Wade, I want you to put your lawyer hat on for me for just a second and argue the position from the best possible scenario. What are the people who are conducting these so-called First Amendment audits, what are they trying to accomplish? What's your best take, your most noble view of their motivations and purposes?
Oh, I mean, I think that, from their perspective, they're trying to hold government accountable. I mean, local government is responsible to the people. We live in a democratic society. And I think absolutely from that perspective, those goals and objectives are laudable. Along the lines of, forget the First Amendment, we have, every state has its own version of the sunshine laws, right? So the Freedom of Information Law, to get access to public records, the Open Meetings Law, which allows individuals to attend and observe meetings of public bodies. Those are also designed and intended to allow the public and the press to observe government officials' actions and hold them accountable. And to that extent, the Supreme Court, the courts have held that news gathering is also protected First Amendment activity. It is part of that right. And so to the extent that you're filming government officials in their conduct, there are First Amendment protections associated with that.
So now flip it to the other side. You serve as general counsel for NYCOM, so I imagine a lot of municipalities call you up for advice and share their experiences. So what's the flip side? What's the practical purpose or the practical result that happens when a First Amendment person shows up to do such an audit?
Well, I think a couple of the things. I think, first of all, one of the things that I think is most effective in First Amendment audits, to be honest, is when they go into a municipality, and it's not about the recording of the individual officials in their office, because to be honest, I don't know what that achieves. You have a video of an official behind the counter, behind the glass, processing a FOIL request. I think the requests to for a record under the Freedom of Information Law, or coming in and asking about a municipality's compliance with the ADA or perhaps some other state right for accessibility. I think that's particularly helpful in many respects. I've asked communities, like, I just had a municipality where they asked them who the ADA coordinator was, and the municipality didn't have one. And so, in that respect, you're like, oh, okay, well, I mean, that's something the local government should know, and holding them accountable, that's not a terrible thing. I do think one of the issues with the recordings that is problematic is there's certain areas where clearly there's no debate that individuals, the public, has a right to record. And we go back to those areas where what we refer to as traditional public forums, streets, sidewalks, parks, village hall steps, city hall steps. In meetings, open meetings of public bodies, clearly you can record in those areas. But other areas, and the case law on this is extensive, shows that those are not areas that are open to the public for recording, offices in particular, and for a variety of reasons. I mean, A, they're not traditional public forums, and B, the government officials themselves have interests in making sure that maybe information isn't distributed widely. And just this past week, again, there was an audit where there was filming. They just went into an individual's office. On their computer screen, they were accessing a federal account, and it had their access number available that was shown on the video. I mean, clearly that's shouldn't be made public. Now, it was a number that was changed periodically. It wasn't going to be good for another 20 minutes or so, but there is sensitive information from a cybersecurity perspective. There's private information that other residents have. If you're going in to get perhaps a death certificate, a birth certificate, you're going in to dispute an issue that's more of a personal nature regarding some bill, a tax bill, water charge, something along those lines. Is that anybody else's business? I mean, should that be recorded? And so, in that respect, the First Amendment doesn't allow for the public to go wherever they want on government property. That has never been the law. And there's clear examples. Can't go into prison, can't go into police department. There are office buildings where there's confidential records, and public officials, they have other work that they have to get done. I mean, they're providing services to the residents, and they need to, I say this, they have custody and control of records within their possession that have a legal obligation to make sure that they are secure and properly maintained. And those areas shouldn't just be open to the public, to anybody from the public to go in. That's not what a democracy means.
Wade, what I think I'm hearing you say is, in deference to the First Amendment, that cities and towns should have a pretty robust openness under the First Amendment, right? That people should be able to come in and have transparency, accountability. These things need to be built in. But I hear you saying, but there need to be limits on this somehow, right? There are limits for proprietary information, for sensitive information. And so I guess maybe the question I need to steer you towards is, how do you advise a city or town start to begin to come up with what are the rules that they can put around what a so-called someone who comes in with a First Amendment audit can and can't do?
Well, okay, so there's two issues there. There's the issue of what can a municipality restrict and whether it should do that, right? Do you want to pick that fight? Okay. Clearly, there are a couple of issues, and let's step back. You asked at the very beginning what it looks like, these audits look like. And from the individual's perspective, the clerk who's at the desk, again, they're used to having people come in on a daily basis. They're residents, property owners, business owners to do business or whatever. It is kind of this unusual instance where somebody's coming in with a camera and they're like, what is going on? This doesn't happen every day. They can be a little bit bellicose in their stance, and they start asking for information. Now, one of the issues that I think is clearly you put off guard and they ask you for your name and title. Well, I mean, you are a public official. What is your name? What is your title? That's public information. Heck, the gross salaries of employees, public employees, is public record information, which I think most people in the private sector are like, oh, I don't want to tell people my salary. But if you're a public employee, that's part of the job in that respect. So, to the extent where's the line that we're drawing. Clearly some information, and I think that's the easy information not to disclose. I'm not sure even many of these First Amendment auditors are asking for too much information that wouldn't have to be disclosed when they're submitting a FOIL request as part of their First Amendment audit pursuant to the state's Freedom of Information law. And my recommendation in that instance is like, okay, it's a FOIL request. Process the FOIL request like you would any FOIL request. It's the bigger issue is like and this is, do you prevent or prohibit filming within these areas that, it's not a traditional public forum? Do you put up signage about where the public can and cannot go? Do you lock your doors? I mean, a lot of municipalities don't like to have their locked doors. They're not big offices, and locking the doors is kind of an inconvenience, but we're seeing more of them do that to the areas where the public shouldn't be going. And that's kind of an easy way to just, this isn't open to the public. It's clear that the auditor shouldn't go there. Or if you post signage, even if you don't like it, no unauthorized personnel beyond that point, that's a decision that generally should be made by the local legislative body who has control over the policies regarding the use of the municipal facilities. I'm not sure if that answered your question in that respect.
Well, I'm going to have to go back and listen to the recording to understand what the lawyer just told me. So does that mean that a city council can decide to put up signs in City Hall to say no unauthorized people are, beyond this point?
Sure, absolutely. I mean, let me give it. So many parts of municipally owned property are not open to the public for a variety of reasons. It's not safe. There's private information. A DPW garage, your water and sewer infrastructure, it's all public property, but that's off behind a fence. So, we have an interest in protecting that infrastructure and what have you. Same thing for office buildings. Now, it's not as maybe sensitive, but again, there might be private records that a municipality has. And those parts of the building shouldn't just be open to whomever who's going to come in for whatever purpose. So
if a person walks up to the person at if a member of the public walks up to the person sitting at the front desk and says, tell me your name and title, you would expect the staffer should be able to provide that, right?
Absolutely.
If the person then says, and now tell me what is your gross annual salary?
Are they obligated to say that either? I mean, they could submit that via FOIL request. I mean, generally, I'm not sure how many, but that's public information.
It's public information, but a legitimate response is that is public information and you can access it through a Freedom of Information Act request.
Yeah, if you want it, sure. The question, and I think that's if you would, and how do you diffuse the situation? Oh, you want to know my salary? Do you want everybody's salary? Like, you could kill them with kindness and like, if you want to submit a FOIL request, here, we can provide this to you. Sure. That is a decision to be made. You're not, as a general rule, FOIL, and this applies, every state's FOIL laws are different, as is the federal government's, right? So they're not all the same. So you have to read the statute or understand the statute from each jurisdiction. But as a general rule, FOIL does not require government officials to create a record. It requires government officials to provide copies of records that already exist, for which there's not a specific statutory reason to withhold disclosure, right? So, do you just provide that information that that they could get? That's a decision to be made by the individual. Do you want to be antagonistic? Do you want to be helpful? I get that too. That's a painful issue. Like, how much we make is kind of a personal question for a lot of people. And it's part of the nature of being a local official or employee.
Wait, I guess and it's probably already leaked out in the way I've asked the questions, but just tell me if I'm wrong here. Is the point of a Freedom of Information audit not really about some legitimate civic function. It's really about creating spectacle and creating a videotaped moment that can be posted and perhaps monetized and used to further some other objective. Am I overstating that?
I hate to be so cynical. I think that is a driver for many of the First Amendment auditors. There's no doubt. I do think there's some element probably in most people like, hey, we want to hold local government officials accountable. I'm not sure how effective it is. Again, like what goal or objective are you achieving by filming these individuals? One of the things I will say, and let's step back for a second, there is, the kind of the history, and this is a relatively recent or new phenomena. Everybody carries a video camera around with them now that didn't happen. I mean, 20 years ago, not everybody had a video camera. We were still with our Blackberries and they didn't have cameras on them, right? I mean, it's 2005. We didn't have the iPhone yet. So times have changed. Clearly, and this is in this day and age, the videoing of, and this is a big issue of law enforcement officials or even non-law enforcement officials in activity that frankly is probably not great for a public official, is an important way to hold local officials accountable. I get that. And I think we've seen many, many examples. In fact, there's court cases to the effect that, hey, there is a right for the public, again, to record government officials. Glick versus Cuniff, which is a case involving the recording of a police arrest in Boston Commons in Massachusetts, is probably the one that's cited most frequently. Another case, Commonwealth versus Bradley, in 2020, again cited the right to record police in performing their duties and functions. Now, those recordings were made out in traditional public forums in the streets. That serves a public purpose. I don't know, going in and watching somebody recording somebody processing a FOIL request. All right. I mean, that's part of their government responsibilities too. Did they handle it well? Not great. Maybe great. Are they complying with ADA? Maybe not great. Those aspects of it, I think, do have some, potential benefit of holding government officials accountable. But clearly, most of the videos that get online and then when we see the clicks or the views are very confrontational ones. And that's kind of the I think what gets there, whether they're monetizing it in that way. I mean, you get money from clicks, and that's what gets clicks is the confrontations, not showing government officials complying with the law or doing a good job. Like, oh, no, who cares about that? That's not interesting viewing.
Well, no one's. I don't think anyone's filming the police officer who's simply, writing a ticket for a car that's overstayed its parking meter. Right? They're filming, moments of crisis, moments of drama that are worthwhile. And in this case, the person who's showing up at City Hall is, in some sense, trying to create that moment of drama. Sure. But early on, you used this word, and now I'm understanding the significance of it. You used the word deference. Right. So even as we've described these so-called First Amendment audits, it sounds, Wade, like you put a lot of deference into the idea that citizens should have access and they should have the ability to come in, and whether they're filming the police officer making an arrest on the street or coming in and filming in the front lobby of City Hall, that actually we should have deference that the First Amendment actually allows that behavior to happen.
Well, clearly, to an extent. I mean, I will give you, and I pointed out just again the example of how far is that line pushed. There was a community down in Florida, city of Punta Gorda, that they took a different tack in addressing this. They're like, all right, we're going to allow you to record. We're not going to have a problem with that, so long as it's done with consent of the other people in our offices, right? Which is a concern. Like you've got somebody, a resident coming in and looking to do business, and maybe they don't want to be recorded in this place that is open to the public, but not a traditional public forum. And I want to make that distinction too. These First Amendment auditors and many other people think that they can record wherever they're allowed to be because it's a public space. And that is not the case. And I'll give you 2 examples of how that's not the case. And that is in our court systems, both in the federal courts and in New York State courts. It can vary in different other jurisdictions. But by federal law, you cannot go in and record a federal court proceeding. You're allowed to be there. The public's allowed to go in. There's constitutional rights with going in and watching and observing judicial proceedings. But there are federal rules that say you cannot record there, even though it is a public place. And I use that analogy. If the courts can say, hey, you can't come into our proceedings that are clearly very have high protections with giving the public access to observe these proceedings, the ability of a local government to restrict recording within its office hall or something along those lines that's not a public forum exists. Do you want to have that fight? I think is the second issue. And particularly with respect to First Amendment auditors, if somebody comes in and violates the rules that you put up, are you willing to go to the next step? Are you willing to prosecute that violation as either a trespass of the municipality, of the municipality's property, or if you've enacted it as a regulation, are you going to prosecute whatever penalties are under that regulation? And if you're not willing to do that, if you're not going to go to the mattresses, so to speak, from an enforcement perspective, I advise municipal officials too, then you should really think about whether or not you should have that regulation at all. The risk can be huge, though. I mean, the risk can be huge because in the First Amendment audits, when they do put up the videos, they're generally all on YouTube. They might have some other social media accounts. They also include the contact information for the local government officials. So you watchers, you viewers who have just viewed this First Amendment audit that didn't go so great for the local government officials can now contact them. You can send them emails or voicemails. And I mean, the first few days after a bad audit gets posted online, it's a nightmare for local officials. I mean, there's death threats. The language that is, conveyed to these individuals is disgusting. I mean, it really is, and it's hard for local officials to deal with. And so, even though, what's the occurrence of frequency? The risk of you doing it wrong, you have to weigh that. If you get it wrong, it's going to be a nightmare for your community for a while.
Wait, I have 2 last questions for you. The first one is simply this. What would it look like to pass a First Amendment audit?
Oh, boy, that's a great question. What would it look like? It would be taking a deep breath. When somebody comes in with a camera, you don't know them. They're not a resident you're familiar with. It's not a normal interaction that you normally have. Somebody comes in, they've got their tax bill, they've got the paper in their hand. You understand what you have a good idea what they're doing. Or they come up without a camera and they come to your clerk's desk and they want to fill out a FOIL form. Perfect. You know how to handle that. When something unusual happens, take a deep breath and then just be friendly. I will say it's one of those things where if they're friendly, if they provide the information, to be honest, that is public information, but people's brains freeze. If you're just, what's my name? That you would normally, if somebody asked your name normally, you would tell them your name. If they asked your title normally under normal circumstances, you would tell them your title. We see so many local officials that when they get the camera in front of them in this kind of aggressive posture, that they become not themselves. So that's part of what I would say is be normal, be friendly. It's hard though, because again, it's confrontational and people aren't used to that.
Be normal, be friendly, be helpful, right? That's what deflects the antagonism that's being presented, right? And that's what we do in local government. We try to be helpful.
Perhaps also, this is another, admit when you're wrong and admit when you don't know. I think that's advice I give to everybody, my kids and my staff. Nobody generally expects everybody else to be perfect. So you've been doing this a long time. What is your best advice to local leaders who are genuinely trying to do the right thing and don't want to end up on YouTube or in court over something they didn't see coming? I mean, I kind of did say that, but I am completely sympathetic to local officials who, again, as I mentioned this before, they have so much on their plates, so many responsibilities. You're running, and I say this in many local governments, the mayor is a part-time mayor. they might not have a manager. So it's the clerk and the department heads who are running the municipality. It's a full-time job, and it is a huge job with huge infrastructure and huge management responsibilities over labor. Do your best and forget the rest. Don't try to be perfect. I think those two things, I really do. Don't go for perfection. I think a lot of people, they don't undertake certain activities because, we're not ready, or I've got to do something else. There's the 80% principle. If you can achieve an 80% of your objective, that's good enough. And I do think that in the context of, for example, First Amendment audits, come in. It could take a quick meeting with your staff and with the board of trustees or your city council, as the case may be. Hey, I just had this training with this association. Every state has an association like the Conference of Mayors, right? That represents local governments, provides training to local governments. I just went to this training. They recommended we do 3 things: establish a policy, put up signs, train the staff. So get it and assign, delegate. All right, city council, you've got to establish a policy. Are we going to allow filming or not? Too much time is spent trying to get things perfect. And I think that's a little bit of a challenge in that respect. And so when you delay putting it off, and I can tell you, there are so many communities on this particular issue. They've seen, because their neighboring municipality had a bad audit and they heard from their friends over in that city, village, town, what the ramifications were for it, the bad, emails and phone calls that they got. And then they didn't address it themselves right away. They kind of put like on the to-do list and they never got to it. I'm sympathetic, but also like, you knew, you were warned, you got to kind of prioritize and put things up there. And then again, try to be like a duck, and when it happens to you, like let it roll off if it doesn't go well. Do your best, admit you were wrong when you were wrong, if you were wrong. I think, again, a lot of people will give local governments credit, although maybe not, because it can be used in a campaign. Oh, they admitted they were wrong, and so we should vote them out. That's a tough thing.
Your answer boiled up to don't do nothing.
Don't do nothing. Complacency is a problem. Absolutely.
It's the same advice we give to people about backing up their hard drives, right? At some point, your hard drive is going to fail. You better do something.
This is another aside all the time, because people think the law answers everything, particularly in the area of local government, because we have lawyers who represent municipalities and the officials themselves who want an answer in the law. And sometimes there are gray areas. Sometimes you find yourself in what we refer to as no man's land, like something didn't go right and you're now in an area that the law doesn't contemplate. So you've got to figure out what to do. And you need to do a risk assessment. What is the risk of doing X, Y, and Z? And in this instance, for First Amendment audits, like the risk can be kind of substantial, even though, like, if it happens to you, like, what's the likelihood of it happening? I don't know. But if it goes wrong, if it does happen to you, it goes wrong, the risk is significant. So you just need to think about that and be aware.
Wade Beltramo, thank you very much again for this education. It has been eye-opening talking to you about all this, and I'm really grateful for your time.
It's been my pleasure.
Thanks again to my guest, Wade Beltramo, the General Counsel of NYCOM, the New York Conference of Mayors. If you found this conversation valuable, please follow the show and leave a review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you're listening. Your feedback helps other community leaders find this space for shared learning and leadership. Community Catalysts is edited by Nick Living the Dream Tantillo. Our executive producer is John Little. I'm Matt Lehrman of Social Prosperity Partners. If you have a question, a comment, or an insight to share, I'd love to hear from you. Reach me at 602-688-2724 or Matt, M-A-T-T, at socialprosperity.us. And if you or someone you know has real-world experience in community leadership, check out the podcast guest link in the show notes. We're always looking for people with stories to share, questions to explore, or perspectives that can inspire others on a similar path. And before I go, I want to offer a final observation. Today's conversation with Wade Beltramo is a vivid reminder that public service, especially at the local level, comes with real and profound responsibility. Transparency and accountability are essential, but so is personal safety, and we don't talk about that nearly enough. Just as first responders, especially police officers, are trained to prioritize getting home safely at the end of their shift, That same mindset should extend to everyone in public service. Whether you're an elected official, a commission appointee, a department leader, or the person at the front desk, you have every right to take your own safety seriously, because showing up to serve your community should never come at the expense of your well-being. And it's not just on individuals to stay aware, it's on all of us as colleagues, leaders, and community members to foster a culture where openness and safety go hand in hand. A healthy democracy depends on both. Protecting the people who keep it running isn't just wise, it's a shared responsibility we all carry together. As Wade said, don't do nothing. Thanks for listening. We'll be back soon with another Community Catalyst.